Hi, everyone, and welcome to session 6 of MVIS 5702.1 Visualization and Practice. Our plan for tonight is to do two things. First of all, to look forward to your capstone experience that's coming over the last two terms of your MICA program. It's very exciting, actually, to talk about this with you because this is literally the capstone experience. It is combining everything that you've learned in the program up to this point. But sometimes it's helpful just to have a little bit of perspective on what's coming. And next, I wanted to do a little bit of a debrief and talk about user testing and get you thinking about what your experience was like. So, firstly, let's talk about how the capstone experience generally works. Unlike other MICA courses, it's divided into two semesters or terms over 16 weeks. So, Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Capstone 1 focuses on planning for your final capstone project in the program. So its outcome is a project plan, something like the brief that you did for this class, but a little more involved and with a little more detail. Capstone 2 focuses on execution of that project plan, and the outcome is a working prototype of a portfolio quality project. But there are a couple things that really distinguish your capstone project in addition to the level of detail and the amount of time that you have to work on it. The first is that you can choose your data set, unlike in this course. So it's totally up to you what kind of data, what source of data you would like to work with. It's to your advantage to pick a topic that you're motivated to study. So this is your opportunity to work on a subject that fits your personal or professional interests and something that your capstone instructor and advisor can help you do is to refine your ideas on what data you'd like to concentrate on, what topics you'd like to concentrate on. And you can iterate on your project for this class. So if you found that working with our data in this term and on this topic was something that you would like to go into more detail on, that's okay, and you can do that, but be sure to talk to your capstone instructor first, and they can give you their expectations about how that would work. So the way capstones 1 and 2 work, just a deeper dive into that, the first 8 weeks in capstone 1, you're focusing on the project plan. There's a bit of a deep dive into various research methods so that you gain more insight and confidence in your choices around data sets and analytical tools and methodologies. The deliverable for Capstone 1 is a project brief. So this is where you will identify your data set and the key project elements, something akin to what we did with our brief in this class, but again, a greater level of detail. Capstone 2, in the second 8 weeks, focuses on execution of that research plan and further iterating on your prototype. So, like in this class, there is a fair amount of critique and interaction both within the class and with the instructor as you continue to develop your working portfolio quality prototype. And then that working portfolio quality prototype is the outcome of Capstone 2. That's your deliverable. What are some hallmarks of successful capstone projects? Firstly, they're truly a capstone experience that showcases all of the most important skills, practices, and insights that you took from the program. So there are lots of different ways to approach this, and it's not really a checklist of everything that you've done necessarily. So you don't necessarily need to use a particular research methodology or a particular visualization application or tool. It's really a matter of what are you really comfortable with, and which tools in the toolbox will show your capabilities to your best satisfaction. Successful capstone projects have a narrow enough focus to show analytics, design, and storytelling skills. And this can be a little challenging when you're picking your own data set because speaking as a researcher and analyst myself, our eyes can sometimes get very big and we can think, well, we're going to use this very large unstructured data set. We're going to explore it a bit, or we're going to document the whole thing. And very quickly, we can find that our scope is just too broad. So picking a narrow scope that, again, is narrow enough to show insight while it's broad enough to have segmentation opportunities and to be statistically significant really helps. Having a clear point of view and or an opinion that's validated through empirical data and storytelling. So this is kind of where you have an opportunity to shine in your capstone project, that you're not just approaching it from a standpoint of documentation or saying what patterns might exist in the universe of data, but you're really approaching it with an interest in a particular point of view or a particular opinion that's borne out by those data, a clear insight. And finally, that there's a clear call to action, that you're not doing a data visualization for its own sake, but you're doing it to motivate a particular action or a particular decision. So again, going back to what is it that you want your audience to do after they've received this information? Some tips to prepare. Now's a good time, if you haven't already, to start thinking about topics that you're passionate about and collecting data. Personal connection to the topic often leads to the strongest projects. Review your previous projects for skills and accomplishments that you'd like to highlight. So, if you did an assignment for a course where you really like the visualization approach that you used, you thought that that worked very well, you really liked the analytical approach, that's something that you can follow on for this project. You can also look at previous capstone projects, which are often posted through the program website, and even consider reaching out to graduates for their thoughts on their own projects. In fact, if you go onto LinkedIn and you search for people who have completed the program, often they'll even post their capstone project. They might even have submitted it in the same form or in a different form to something like the Data Visualization Society's Information is Beautiful Awards. And so that's a good source of inspiration. And finally, develop a repository or a mood board, like what we talked about last week, of visualization examples that inspire you. So now let's put that aside and let's do a debrief of user testing. I hope you had a good experience with that, and I just wanted to capture a few key points of user testing. So, why is user testing essential? Again, it reveals blind spots in your design and also your narrative, can present insights about how different audiences interpret and interact with the design. The most important question that it can answer is, does the design communicate insights as you intend? Are different features intuitive? And is the call to action clear? So if you find out in user testing that those things are happening, that's great. And that's something that you can iterate on. If you find that there are opportunities to make features more intuitive, to add road mapping, to clarify the call to action and your insights, it's good to find that out in the user testing phase so that you can make those changes before finalizing the visualization. And finally, it helps you prioritize those improvements and edits that will have the greatest impact. You may not have time or the inclination to make all the improvements that are suggested, but you can prioritize the ones that are most important. Of course, in an 8-week class, we have time constraints. In a perfect world, we would be able to recruit somewhere between 8 and 12 participants and be able to sit down with them for about a half hour each. That's not possible typically in the scope of this class, but in regular practice, you can consider testing with multiple audiences to address different elements in the experience. So if you're creating a visualization that's meant for, let's say, more senior and more junior people, you can test members of both of those cohorts to make sure that they're getting value from the tool, from the visualization. Likewise, multiple points of view and levels of experience, or different elements to focus on. So on the one hand, you need to have some level of standardization in each iteration of the user testing. So you want to ask each tester to do similar things. But if you're doing multiple rounds of testing with multiple groups of people, you might have one group that is concentrating on a different element of the visualization versus another group that's looking at another different element. As far as roles go, again, in a perfect world, it's often best practice to use a third party or an objective member of your organization to collaborate with on user testing and to actually conduct the interviews, because this gives a little bit of distance between the work product and the people who have created the work product and the person evaluating and conducting the user tests. But again, that's not always possible. So, for example, in the library, National Library of Medicine, when we were finalizing our library-wide analytics dashboard, we did user testing with about 10 internal customers who we interviewed for about 30 minutes each. Our team listened in on those sessions, but we had a staff member from another part of the library who wasn't involved with this particular project, but had done a lot of user testing for his part of the library. We had him lead the interviews so that, again, he didn't really have a vested interest in what the responses were. Some other testing pointers. A mix of playtime and guided tasks is always useful because it shows both the user experience with specific activities, but also general impressions that your testers might have. And it also is interesting and insightful to see what elements they gravitate towards. What do they click on first and second? Taking good notes is always helpful as well to document what you're looking at. You can record sessions, of course, with permission. Sometimes you have access to screen trackers that can actually show where the user's cursor is going if you're doing it virtually. So that's another option too. Best practice also is between interviews in the same round. So if you are talking with 5 audience members, and then maybe another 5 in another part of the organization or looking at another part of the dashboard, don't make changes on the fly between interviews, but rather collect your findings and then make edits to your visualization so that all of your testers are having the same experience. And that way, if you find that one comment is an outlier and the other testers really didn't have the same experience, you can address that issue accordingly. But if you find that 5 out of 5 people hit on a similar attribute, that might be a change worth making. And finally, test both the story, in other words, the strength of the logic and the overall narrative, and the experience. So, do various buttons and other affordances work? Is information clear and easy to navigate? And so on. So now I'd turn the conversation back to you and ask, how was your experience with user testing? And that's something that we can address in the discussion this week. So to wrap up, we talked about preparing for the capstone experience. We reflected on user testing a bit. As we wrap up the course over the next 2 weeks, looking ahead, we'll be finalizing our prototypes and reflecting further on visualization in practice. So thanks very much. Again, don't forget optional office hours, Friday from 11 to noon Eastern Time, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.